Greetings, friends. This is Chris Batts, your host of the Law Firm Leadership Podcast. Today's episode is number 2 of a 2-part series where I had a conversation with Craig Katerberg, the General Counsel of Anheuser Busch. Last episode, we discussed all things COVID-19. And in this episode, we're discussing his global M&A career, his leadership style, his passion for doing things better, going in-house advice, and much, much more. If you haven't already, please subscribe to this podcast and also leave a review on iTunes. As many of you know, we interview corporate defense law firm leaders, partners, general counsel, and legal consultants. You're listening to episode 41 of the Law Firm Leadership Podcast.
Broadcasting from Kansas City, this is the Law Firm Leadership Podcast. In each episode, you'll receive actionable ideas and hear personal leadership stories of both men and women serving as leaders and executives in the legal industry. Enjoy a front row seat as Chris Batts speaks with general counsel, legal consultants, and law firm leaders and law partners at the top corporate defense law firms from around the United States.
Welcome to the Law Firm Leadership Podcast. I'm your host, Chris Batts with the Lion Group. Today I have the pleasure of speaking again with Craig Katerberg, General Counsel of Anheuser Busch of St. Louis. Welcome, Craig, to the Law Firm Leadership Podcast. It's great to have you on the show again.
Thanks, Chris. It's a pleasure to be here.
So, Craig, what I'd like to do just from the beginning of this for my listeners is for you to give a little bit of an overview of your career. So I understand, so you went to University of Chicago. When was it when you realized you were going to be a lawyer?
Yeah, so no, because it's a question I end up getting a little bit, but it wasn't at all during University of Chicago. It was a little bit later. I was actually working for the city of New York in the Bloomberg administration. And the third year that I was there, I ended up working a lot on different projects around the city doing neighborhood development. And so there were a lot of contracts involved with the neighborhood groups. So the city's law department was a function that I worked a lot with, and I had some really amazing lawyers that were there who I keep in touch with to this day. And I was then looking at, okay, well, I like this work. I like working with these people. Maybe I'll go to law school, and started applying really at that point. So yeah, no, they inspired me, and we've kept in touch since then, I would say.
That's excellent. And so you went to Northwestern University. You shared this with me before, but you have a passion for corporate M&A transactions. What led you back to New York and end up at Simpson Thacher?
Yeah, absolutely. No, so it was a bit of an odd situation because I think most people who I was certainly in law school with, and I think in general in law school, really were going through litigation, and the way law school is taught is very much around litigation mindset. I was thinking of it much more as, the way to become a lawyer is that you go to law school. And I knew I liked doing contracts and deals and all of those pieces. So I knew really kind of from the beginning that I wanted to be more in that corporate world, or about building deals or putting together contracts or any of those. So I ended up approaching it probably a little bit differently than most people who go to law school. And so when I did summer internships during law school, and then afterwards wanted to work really with Latin America and internationally. And Simpson Thacher had a great practice in that area, so I ended up going and working with them, even though I think I worked on a grand total of 0 Latin American deals while I was there.
What was your interest in Latin America?
Well, I'd done Latin American history as my major at University of Chicago.
That's
so
right.
I'd done history, and then I went down to Peru one of the summers that I was there because I was frankly very frustrated that I could not speak Spanish despite having learned quite a bit in high school. And so I spent the first half of the summer hiking around in Peru, and my job every day was to basically go and speak Spanish from dawn till dusk and actually be able to speak Spanish after a while. And so then second half of the summer, I went back home and worked construction to be able to pay for the first half. But that was what sparked it. And there were just so many places, especially up in the highlands in Peru, that are just archaeologically fascinating, and it's just such a deep and layered history.
Yeah, I know that we shared a similar passion or just appreciation for the people of Peru. And I look forward to talking about that again later in the podcast as we talk about family. That's going to be fun. In regards to you end up being in corporate M&A, doing deals with Simpson Thacher, the journey in-house, was it serendipity? Was it something you've always wanted to do? Help me understand that.
Yeah, I liked working at Simpson. I mean, the work was fascinating, right? And they do a lot of private equity work. So I'd rotated through securities, done a little bit of M&A that was there, and I was working with executive compensation and employee benefits. And for Simpson, that meant working a lot with the management team and the sponsor companies, and also with the PE deal teams. And so you would see so many different transactions, and I really liked that aspect. So I was planning on continuing on that path, and then a now friend of mine gave me a call, and she had left. She was working at Simpson, but she had left about a year before to join AB InBev. So she said, hey, there's this position that's open over in New York, 3 blocks away from Simpson's office. They really like people with international backgrounds, people who want to try out new experiences, who really just jump into things. And I think you might be a really good cultural fit for AB InBev. And so I interviewed with the now general counsel globally for AB InBev, who heads up corporate affairs as well, and then our then global general counsel and head of corporate affairs, who now sits on the ABI board. And so I had a great conversation with her. Her name is Sabina Chalmers, and she's been a great mentor, and with him as well, John Blood, who's the current head of legal and corporate affairs, and really likes the people, likes the culture, likes the energy, the open office, all of those different kind of aspects that came into it. And so I was really delighted when the position was offered to me, and that's really when I started. So I wasn't looking at that time. It was really something that more came to me because of a colleague of mine who's now a GC for another company based in New York.
Is it safe to say that when you were an associate at Simpson, that was this the first time you got that opportunity, or were there other times that came to you to go in-house?
There were other ones that were there, but they were not necessarily ones that I was as excited about. So there were others, and there were certainly a lot of opportunities that would come up. But this was the first one that really I thought, wow, this is kind of exciting. I wasn't much of a beer drinker at that time. I had done a little bit, and, my brother was very into different beers. And, 312 is a great Goose Island beer out of Chicago, so I drank a bit of that one during law school in particular. So that was one of my favorites. But I will say that, it wasn't something where I said, oh, I absolutely want to be working at, a beer company or the rest of it. I was frankly more excited about kind of the M&A aspects and the securities law angles and, working with really great people and just trying something new, frankly.
Yeah. And again, I'm just going to go back to another question. Was it ever your perspective, like thinking forward, I'm going to law school and I ultimately want to end it in a corporate legal department position? Or was it just kind of the canvas was blank and you were just curious about the whole journey and the uncertain?
It was more of a blank canvas, candidly, just because I knew, yes, there were law firms that were out there you could work at. I mean, my background was I was working for city government in New York. And so the idea of going and working in the public sector as a public servant was very much, top of mind. That was something I would have been, I think, very happy doing and enjoyed a lot. And it was more kind of the opportunities that came up. I mean, I'm the first lawyer in my family, and, our family business is much more in lawn sprinkling and, education and things along those nature. So the idea of going to law school was not something I'd kind of grown up with. I didn't know, I don't think any lawyers, certainly not close family lawyers that were there. So then, when working for the city of New York, that was really the first time that I ended up working a lot with lawyers in different areas. And so I didn't have my eyes set on a particular job or title or even, sector, law, in-house or law firm or public sector, any of that.
Let's move into just a place of this topic of leadership. And so you have the general counsel role for Anheuser Busch, one of the most iconic brands in the United States. Craig, my question, I guess, is who inspires you or what inspires you to be the leader that you are?
Yeah, I think a lot of that gets into, family things very quickly, right? So when you think about people, I tend to spend a lot of time with my family and close friends that are there. And so it certainly starts when you think about, your parents and your grandparents and how much of an influence that they've had on you, and hopefully that you have positively on your children as well. So I always kind of start with that one, which I think a lot of people have. And I certainly value the education that they were able to give me and my siblings, and then also just the morals and the values about working hard and treating people well and all of those. So I would start there really before anyone else. I think I've had amazing leaders and mentors at various points. And I would say, many of the people who I've had within ABI, I stay very much in touch with. So our business president for Chile and for Peru is someone who I've worked with since, probably 7-8 years. We've maintained a mentorship relationship during that time. And she's a great leader of the team there and was previously in people roles, which is our HR team, and then within finance roles as well. So she's been in Russia and Latin America and the U.S. and a lot of different places. So she's someone who is very inspirational. And I would say really both John Blood, who I'd mentioned previously, who is our global general counsel and head of corporate affairs, is someone who really wants the best for his people and the company and all of that. And that is something that I think is incredibly important, because really as a leader, you want to just pave the way for your teams to make sure that people are able to develop really at the pace that they are able to or want to at that particular stage of their life. And I think, Sabina Chalmers is a really inspiring leader. If you ever heard her speak, she is just incredible. And she sits on our board as well as being the general counsel over at British Telecoms. And she is both very personal and very human, and also incredibly sharp and professional and insightful when it comes to so many things. So there's been no shortage really of great leaders within the company, even before we start looking to, philosophers and people who've written great books and all of the other probably even larger themes that are there. So I'm just very fortunate on that one to have great leaders around.
Hi friends, this is Chris Batts. Over the next month or two, we're going to do a listener show. I'll consider doing these shows every 3 to 6 months, depending on your participation, the number and kind of questions you submit. Please submit your questions and I'll spend some time reading through them and commenting. I have 2 easy ways for you to submit your questions. Number 1, you'll receive a link when you text the phrase LFL podcast to the number 44222. That's LFL PODCAST, or by clicking the Give Feedback link in the show notes on your device. Please take a moment and do this now. I look forward to your questions. Thank you, everyone. And now back to the show. Craig, how do you define leadership?
Leadership for me is really around the way that you act and how it is that you create opportunities for people. So when I think about what leadership is, it's not about what you can achieve or what's attached to your name for it. It's about what we overall or what the team is able to achieve. And so I think, good leadership is making sure first that people know what is expected and where it's going, but then also that they are rewarded and recognized for what they've contributed in. So I think good leadership is really around making sure that people are able to do their best and be their authentic selves. There's a lot of talk about what that means exactly, but it's allowing people to do the best that they're able to and having opportunities that they are well equipped for or that they would be trained up for. So it's much less about what the leader does, much more about allowing the team to go in a direction that, the business needs, or, just developing people. So for me, that's a bit what it comes down to. It doesn't really fit that well in a soundbite, I'm afraid.
No, and it sounds great. And let me pivot to another one for you. So as general counsel for you, Craig, and I know the role has been a newer role for you in your career, what are some of the important routines that you implement either daily or weekly in that role?
The first general counsel position that I had was one that was based in Australia, and it covered India and Southeast Asia and Australia. And so one of the routines that I started doing was just a weekly email that was with the team. It started off, frankly, just here's where I am geographically this week, because it's just easier to coordinate that way, frankly. And then it kind of grew to include, the shouts of recognition is something that I do, where you just recognize certain actions that people have done that week. And it can be about like really big milestone things, but it can also be about kind of small things, but that are demonstrative of what's important in the culture overall. And so I found that was actually very helpful for the team because first, just knowing, okay, is Craig in town or is there something, happening across the board that I should be aware of? But then more than that is it brought, I think, a bit more of awareness kind of on a recurring basis that people would understand, oh, there's kind of a crisis going on in India at this point, or, Vietnam has this major festival coming on where they're out for Tet holiday, sort of the New Year going on during that period. And so I think it kind of brought a lot of awareness, and that became, in some ways, a bit more of an understanding between people just about all of the different challenges and the great work that teams were doing, even when they were not so present. So that's something that I've continued, with the team in Europe, we did that, and then with the team in the U.S. as well. And so it's kind of built out a little bit where I try to even flag upcoming events. And then I always just include, a picture of the week, which sometimes is connected in with our larger strategy. Sometimes it's just with a funny photo of different people, but something that is just enjoyable, frankly, that I find that the team generally likes. So that's one example.
And it's an excellent example. I'm glad you brought it up. You mentioned that to me before, and I think it's just an excellent way of kind of keeping the team together and sharing your leadership. Another question. So how do you, Craig, approach hiring outside counsel?
I would say Anheuser Busch is really blessed in a lot of ways because we have over 100 years of relationships in a lot of cases, and that includes with some of the law firms that we've worked with. So certainly we have very strong relationships in St. Louis. We have very strong relationships with firms on the East Coast and the West Coast. And so there are a lot of established relationships that we're always looking to deepen and find better ways of working together. So there are definitely instances where we're looking for new counsel on different areas, or where we think there might be somebody who is able to provide what we need in that particular area or that new piece that's there. But it's a very high benchmark in a way, and a lot of very good and trusting and long-term relationships that we do have with really excellent talent. So when I'm looking for new talent coming in, I always look much more to who is the lawyer and what is the lawyer going to be able to contribute in, much more than, what is the firm name, or do I need this one because it will be recognized by our board of directors. It's much more about who do I think is going to be best in this particular instance and who's going to be focused on what we need and put the company's interest first, and frankly tell me if something is going wrong or that they're not comfortable with. I think that transparency and that awareness and desire to do it the right way is all very important.
Excellent. Craig, let's go into kind of just the challenges you face. And if you can give me some background, how large is your legal team right now?
We're 78 in terms of the legal team. Okay. That does include, I would say, physical security. That includes our ethics and compliance team, where we have different pieces on data analytics. We have quite a few non-attorneys within the team, project managers, paralegals, really across the board. So I'd say 78 is the number in the U.S., more in Canada as well. But then in the U.S., 78, but not all of them are attorneys either, I'd say.
And being a leader over that team, and as carrying the title as kind of North America General Counsel, but specifically over Anheuser Busch, what challenges are you faced with now that you have this helm? I know you brought up and you're excited about legal operations and that's application, ethics and compliance. I know legal technology has kind of come up occasionally in our conversation. So I'd be curious to hear your thoughts about the challenges you face.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, for me, it really starts with, okay, what is it that we're trying to do here together as a team, right? I mean, the business itself clearly has very, very clear guidance in terms of where we're going on a commercial strategy. And I certainly believe very strongly in that commercial strategy. I think we're on the right path with that one. And so then it is a matter of how is it that we can best support that commercial strategy and do it the right way so that we're doing it with integrity, following the law, and making sure that it's as painless as possible for everybody who is out there, brewing beer and selling beer, which is ultimately what we as a company are doing.
Yes.
And so one of the things that I find fascinating is what we're calling legal operations 2.0. And that is one that we're really embedding ethics and compliance within a lot of technology within the company. So what we do by that is we generally figure out where it is that business colleagues are spending a lot of their time, right? And I mean that geographically, but I also mean that electronically. So with technology, what is the app that people are going to and using most often? And once we can identify that for whether it's the sales team or the marketing team or any of the different areas, then we know kind of, all right, what is their lived experience electronically? And you can go and see how it is that people are actually using that technology already. So I almost start with the commercial side of it about what is going on and what's kind of already happening, which is in a lot of ways kind of the status quo and where that's going. And then, all right, how do we then build in rules and algorithms and a lot of the things that we as lawyers get questions on into that existing technology and existing platforms and build it in the back end so that if people are just going about their day-to-day job, they don't need to be thinking, oh, what is the law for Nevada? What is the law for Alaska? They can be thinking about, okay, am I able to do this? What shows up on the screen? And then maybe there would be pop-ups and others that come for certain warnings. But for the most part, it's just built into the back end. And so people don't realize there's a lot of smart technology that's there, that's ingrained within the system. And so it's working with the commercial teams to be able to create something, in a lot of ways, I think, unique within our business, so that not only do you keep people doing the right thing, which is what 80, 90, hopefully 100% of people are wanting to do anyway, but you're also then understanding kind of the back end and what the data is and where there might be risk areas, and you can use it predictively as well to try to identify any of those areas going forward where there might be risks or where there's unusual activity or any of those pieces. So as a journey, we certainly not crack the code on everything or even most things, but I think with the pace of technology and the way that that's going, that's something that we spend a lot of time trying to make sure that we're creating the right environment to have success, and that ethics and compliance is almost built in with the logic into the lived experience of people.
Craig, as kind of the chief legal officer of Anheuser Busch, you manage teams. What is it that you look for in hiring legal talent? What do you look for in your people?
It's a great question on this one because I and we don't tend to put a ton of weight on, what was the GPA of this particular area? Was this person on law review? Even, what schools are people going to? We tend to focus a lot more on what is something that this person is really excited about and cares about and has really kind of gone all in on in a way. And so that can be kind of entrepreneurs who've done that. That can be, if people have gotten involved in different societies, if they have even gotten into, political campaigns, if they've worked really hard within a law firm, within particular committees that are there. But we're almost trying to identify, okay, is this someone who has really great integrity, is thorough about the work, really cares about what they're doing, has great work ethic in general, and then really kind of cares and is excited about doing the work that needs to be done, but also kind of that aspect about learning what else is out there. Like, I love people who want to learn new things and want to just try it out and figure out if there's something, new and different that can be done, and kind of that tinker mentality that comes into it. So that's a long list, Chris, but that's some of the things. So in a lot of ways, it's probably more passion and energy with a baseline around kind of all of the other things that you would need to be successful.
Hi, listeners. This is Chris Batts, legal recruiter and owner of The Lion Group. My team and I place legal and compliance talent around the United States and are known for our level of communication, speed, and strong track record. If you're an employer hiring your first attorney or first general counsel or adding talent to your corporate legal department or compliance team, we should talk. Also, if you're a corporate defense law partner or group wondering about your options for a lateral move, we should also talk. Every aspect of our process is confidential, fast, and thorough. Contact us by going to our website, findthelions.com, or you can text the word headhunter to the number 44222, and then complete the web form and we'll follow up with you shortly. Now back to the show. That's excellent. And I just appreciate you sharing that, because there's always this uncertainty or hesitancy about going in-house. And I have to agree with you. I find clients would have interest in candidates, maybe the ones that are in private practice that want to go in-house, but they're looking for the ones that are truly thrilled about the idea of serving on a team and will kind of do anything. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that, yeah, I mean, I've worked on the finance side before, and I've worked on the legal side. And one of the things I remember, early in my career was talking with one of the investment bankers, at like 2 a.m. or on one of these deals where you're kind of around a conference room and working through things. And, what he said to me was, like there's a lot of people who want great jobs and the rest of it. There's a lot of people who want the credit for doing deals and will be there with you at 2 or 3 a.m. when you're going through it. I want the people who want to be there in the room with me at 2 or 3 a.m, who want to be involved and want to be moving things ahead, which sounds totally insane because, of course, everybody wants to be sleeping at those hours.
Right.
And at the same time, I kind of understand it, right?
Yeah.
Because, when there's something thrilling going on or you're putting a deal together or, it's something that's coming together, you kind of want to be in the room and you want to be involved with what's going with it. Not just kind of in the room and sitting there, but you want to be actively putting it together and be part of something and be building that and pulling it together. So that's, I think, an insane way to say it, but it also, in a lot of ways, resonates.
And so I guess I'll just kind of, in almost in transition, but just ask you, Craig, if you were to give some anecdotal advice to attorneys in law firms who, and I get calls all the time from them, help me go in-house, I want to go in-house. What's your anecdotal advice for them?
Yeah, I would say there's a few different things that you can do, right? And I'm sure there's many more, but a few that just jump to mind. One is I would say make sure that you're meeting and talking with people in lots of different areas, right? That can be with a bar association. I did that when I was in New York. Just met a lot of really fabulous attorneys from different firms, but it was in an area that I cared a lot about. So I think just meeting people who are in an area that you care about or that you would like to see yourself in is a very big one. I would say doing great work is kind of a baseline. I mean, it sounds really simple, but doing really great work is recognized by people. And a lot of the people who we meet, first year, second year, tend to go on to become MDs very quickly at banks, tend to become general counsels fairly quickly as well. And if you've done great work in those instances, people tend to remember that. So I think that's in some ways almost a baseline, but it absolutely needs to be there. And then I think just getting involved in different organizations and frankly reaching out to people who you think would be interesting or have had interesting trajectories or who might be able to connect you in with somebody. I tend to do a fair number of just meeting and having coffees with people because that was something that I benefited a lot from when I was talking to different people and trying to decide about one path versus another. And so I certainly like to encourage others to reach out, and it's often very difficult. And you obviously want to be respectful of people's time, but at the same point, it is important to be able to understand a little bit what the world looks like. And if you're going to like the day-to-day, right? Because a title is one thing. Actually doing the work and doing it consistently is very much another.
Craig, let's jump into, again, what you had shared with me is your passion or has been one of your passions in practicing law. So let's talk about all these deals you've worked on. You've had this incredible opportunity, invitation to basically do global M&A for Anheuser Busch all around the world. Can you kind of pull us into your world and kind of highlight some of the favorite deals you worked on and maybe some things you learned from it, whether it be challenges or insights for my listeners?
Yeah, so Grupo Modelo was the first transaction that I really worked on with ABI, and it was a fascinating one because it involved, U.S. and Mexico and a lot of really interesting follow-on transactions as well. So it ended up being several transactions all in one, each of which was, one was $20.1 billion and the others were each over $1 billion as well. Okay. And so it ended up being kind of a fascinating insight into the way that our executive team was interacting with all of the different external providers. So the law firms, of course, but also the banks, the public relations groups, communications experts. You can go down the list throughout the transaction. It was a transaction that really took over a year in totality that was there. So that was obviously high profile and a fascinating experience. And then from there, I worked on different transactions really first in Korea, but then in mainland China as well. And so the dynamics were very different. And then there's just been different deals even with Australia and how we essentially bought the Australian business and brought it into the company. So no, there's been a few of those. I'm happy to get into more detail on, frankly, any of these.
Yeah, well, let's do high level, and let me ask, what about these deals that just were so fascinating and exciting for you, besides being, having some of the largest beverage M&A deals in the world that you've worked on?
One of the things I love about M&A is that there are similarities, but every deal is unique and is very influenced by the personalities and the motivations that are there. So if I think about Grupo Modelo, on the ABI board, we have a board member who was one of the members from the founding families in Mexico. Okay. And she is on our board today and was, very much leading the transaction at the time in Mexico. That motivation and that desire to continue to be a very successful businesswoman is something that I think is, clearly evident, and she's incredibly sharp, as opposed to, right, we've done private equity sales and buyouts as well, where you're talking a lot about IRR and return on investment and a lot of financial concepts that are there, and also how it is that, a PE firm can help companies improve during the tenure that are there and even invest for the future in some of those areas. So I think the motivations and the personalities that are there are pretty fascinating. But of course, understanding the overall process and deal flow and timing that comes along with it gives you at least a little bit of context and the orientation that is helpful when going through a deal. So yeah, the similarities and the differences, I think, are probably some of the things that I love about doing deals. And you get to spend a lot of time with people, right, in all the different rooms.
I want to ask a question just to understand you better, Craig, but are you the type where you enjoy kind of the high level pressure and the thrill of the M&A deal? Or do you enjoy, if I may use the word, the nerding out of the intricacies and the details and the unique nuances of each deal? Which one of those would probably represent you better?
That is a difficult one, I would say, because okay. I do love the overall timing and flow of the deals and finding ways to really kind of add value, which can be through dollar amounts or shortening timelines or thinking about things in a different approach. So all of that, I love. So kind of the deal junkie and flow of deals. But then, getting into the mechanics and the specifics of the deal, it's pretty fascinating, right, when you're thinking about, the due diligence and what it means to understand how it is that, labels are printed on bottles in different parts of the world and how that can have a major cost impact in terms of what your operational costs are going to be, what they are now, what they might be in the future, all of those things that kind of ladder up into what people are talking about in terms of synergies on deals. Because my belief is most M&A deals are value destructive. I don't think most of our ABI deals have been value destructive. I think we have a great team that works through integration and a lot of those issues. But to be able to be successful within that, you need to have the corporate cultures mesh and really good people come together. But you also need the people who nerd out in a lot of ways about those kinds of details, because it's not always sort of, $1 million pot of money that's there and that's just going to be the synergies. It's often things about, if we can save a half a penny in this area, but we can do it 14 billion times, then we're talking about significant money, and you do that several times around, and you're able to actually bring, synergies into consumers and into the company at the end of the day.
So, Craig, when you left Simpson Thacher in New York, you joined a team that took you globally. So you worked on these global deals in countries all over the world. Tell me which places you enjoyed the most when you were living overseas.
China was a fascinating place. Loved it. Awesome people. The food was incredible. Really, Shanghai in a lot of ways is living in the future. So I think China is a fascinating one. And I would say, Australia is one of those that is a unique culture in so many ways, within sports culture, food culture, beer culture. Whenever there's a new prime minister in Australia, we see it very much that both of the prime minister candidates will be there on the front page of the paper with a beer in hand. So I loved living in Melbourne, down in Australia. And, Tasmania is one of my favorite parts in the world, which is just a short flight over, a short boat ride over there from Melbourne. So I would put those two for sure very high on the list.
What's fascinating about Tasmania for you?
I just love, first of all, we have a gorgeous brewery there going back to 1824, which is the Cascade Brewery. So that is the most beautiful brewery in the world. And the city of Hobart, which is, a 5-minute drive away from there, and actually gets its city water from the mountain behind the brewery, where it comes through, where all the water comes through, is really kind of an iconic one where it's a unique place in the world. It's where a lot of the ships for Antarctica leave from Hobart. And it's kind of an old fishing town that is one of the earliest places where there were white settlers in Australia. And it was a penal colony for a long time. And a lot of Australia was a penal colony, but Tasmania was the very difficult penal colony. It was where the other penal colonies sent their prisoners at that point. So there's a lot of fascinating history and architecture, and the people and the culture there is pretty amazing. And that's even before you get to the whole Aboriginal portion, where Tasmania has kind of a unique Aboriginal history with it as well.
Yeah. So I know that you grew up in Michigan, correct?
Correct, yep.
So you're Midwest raised, generally speaking, and yet you've been overseas quite a bit. Now you came back to St. Louis. Can you tell me some of the differences that you've noticed being back in the Midwest, particularly in St. Louis?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the warmth of people in the Midwest is very, very noticeable. So that I would say is absolutely one. I think the portion sizes are a bit bigger than in most parts of the world as well. And one of the things I love about St. Louis is that there's so much St. Louis pride, right? When you think about it, it's clearly a huge sports town, and it's one that is really, people get very animated about sports and about the city of St. Louis and about the arch and each of those pieces. So I think that's absolutely the case. I think it's a little bit different getting back to driving most places. The U.S. is, obviously more spread out than a lot of parts of the world. And, St. Louis is a great one where you can get most places in 20, 30 minutes. So, yeah, a couple of differences there.
So I'm going to speak on a number of kind of international subjects, and I just want to kind of give a shout out to a mutual friend of ours, Frank Aquila at Sullivan Cromwell. And I know you guys have friendship and history together working on deals in the beverage industry. Frank and I he was actually episode 20 for me. And so I went through a series of kind of international subjects with him, similar to what I'm going to do right with you now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start mentioning a couple different names or phrases, and then you just throw out your thoughts really kind of quickly, kind of shotgun approach. So Brexit, what's your thought on Brexit now that it's finally happened?
I think Brexit is now confirmed when I think about it.
Yep.
Clearly, I think there were a lot of pundits who didn't believe the vote the first time, and second time it came through. I don't hear much more of the quibbling in a lot of ways. So I think the wonderful thing about democracy in a lot of ways is that it does give a clear direction, even if it's the one that not a lot of people or experts would anticipate or would even want. So, yes, looks like it is very much going ahead.
And the business challenges or upsides because of it now, and with the EU feeling a little fragile because of it?
Yeah, I think there's always business disruption, which is certainly the case in Brexit. There was obviously enough time to plan for the eventual exit, and it will continue to have additional cost of business for sure. I think that is the case anytime you put in additional regulation or barriers between different locations, which is one of the reasons why the United States, I think, has been so successful, is how few restrictions there have been just on commerce across the entire United States. So for sure, additional cost of business, additional difficulties, but not so different than what you see in a lot of different countries or cross-country parts of the world.
Here's a question. What are some things that have changed in your mind, Craig, about practicing law for the past 10 years? So has anything changed since you began the practice of law that has changed in your mind?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there was very much, going through law school, there was a lot of ways a path towards big law, and then what that looks like as far as going through that firm or a different firm and becoming a partner. And that's obviously still there, but I think you've seen a huge proliferation, really when it comes to the types of legal jobs that are out there, and how many non-law firms there are that are providing legal services or legally adjacent services, either related to technology or, in terms of branding, in terms of positioning, communications, reputation, governance issues. So there's a lot of these that I think would traditionally have been very much, in the last decade, much more within inside counsel and then external counsel that people are exploring new models and kind of looking around to innovate in those spaces. So yeah, I see that is the trend and that is absolutely continuing.
So kind of shifting in the time of the podcast, I wanted to shift to more personal. And I know family is a really important subject for you. And you shared with me that your wife is Peruvian. Is that correct?
Correct, yep.
Would you mind sharing your story? How did you two meet?
Oh, yeah. So we met in college, actually. So we went University of Chicago, as you mentioned. And my wife's roommate was from Michigan. My roommate was from Columbia. And so, we had the Michigan connection. So we ended up chatting a little bit. And then she and my college roommate had the Latin connection. And so we met first as friends and knew each other and spent a decent amount of time together, and then started dating really, third year of college, and then moved out to New York together and have moved around, first around Latin America, but then around Asia together during that time as well. So things are going pretty well so far.
Yeah, that's awesome. So she's really been kind of on the adventure with you and a travel companion.
Yeah, and I would say in a lot of the instances, she was the travel leader, right? I mean, she worked as a banker before, and so a lot of, when we moved down to Argentina, it was because of her work. When we moved to Panama, it was because of her work. And then, we lived in different places as well. But yeah, for the first, several years, it was very much, her career was in the driver's seat, and mine was one that we were, working and doing interesting things. But I would pick up and move and follow her for that opportunity. And then the last few years, it's been very much that, she's been working with the kids and doing private advising and things that she's able to do from home. And that, when we've moved, it's been because of my job change. And that, she's been very open to that and very supportive and frankly, very encouraging. So it's something that I have a lot of passion on as far as, different cultures and knowing different places around the world and the way people interact. And she absolutely loves it as well. So it's pretty good alignment of interest there. I
would say so. And you guys have little ones too, correct?
We do. My daughter just had her 7th birthday party this weekend out at Grant's Farm in St. Louis.
Oh, that's fun. I heard it was pretty epic.
It was fun. Yeah, it was fun. It was 60 degrees in February, so there was no going wrong on that one. And then we had people running around. They fortunately sat for the animal tour that we had. Okay. But no, I think the kids had a lot of fun, and the parents got kids that were tired at the end of the day and ready to hopefully sleep well. Yeah, so that was a nice day.
That's excellent. So what do you guys tend to do to enjoy life outside of work?
Yeah, so we spend a lot of time together. It'll be baking. It'll be visiting. I have a brother who lives in St. Louis, so visiting him, his wife. They have a new baby, so my kids like to be the bigger cousins. We tend to go out walking whenever there's the opportunity and go hiking around, not in sort of the epic 3-day, 5-day areas, but, exploring new places. We'll drive out to Chicago, hopefully out to Kansas City soon, and, just exploring a little bit of different areas. So the biggest one that I have for the kids right now is I'm going to go take them camping somewhere where there's no light pollution. And so they have to learn the constellations first, and then we're going to hit up the planetarium and then get out there and see what the night sky looks like without light.
That's so fun. And you've told me you guys have taken some really nice international trips. Are you guys still making the plans for that in Peru this year?
Yeah, we do get down to Peru at least every year. That's awesome. That's where my wife's whole family is. And so we spend a lot of time in Peru every chance we get, right? And so they're based in Lima. And the food in Lima is just incredible, right? So, if you go for your ceviche or lomo saltado or, so many different dishes that are there, it's just an incredible place to be. So we generally try to be in Lima a bit. And then if we're there for longer periods of time, we'll explore somewhere, either to the south in Lima or up in the highlands. But yeah, try to take advantage of, the speaking Spanish aspect and then spending time together as a family, but not necessarily in the house or in the same comfort zone that we normally would be.
Yeah. So pivoting, Craig, are you a reader?
Yeah. I love to read lots of different things. Fiction is one of the ones I like a lot.
Yeah. Tell me what's on your bookshelf or what you recommend for my readers.
One that's outside of my genre, I would say, is The Name of the Wind, is one by Patrick Rothfuss. I'm probably butchering his name, but I haven't actually met him to know if that's correct. But it's this fantasy book where there's 2 out of the 3 series, and it's almost kind of mysticism wrapped in with the importance of storytelling, set in kind of a medieval world that's there. So very outside of what I normally get into, but that was one that I find fascinating. But realistically, if I go back into fiction where I spent a lot of time, or anything by Hideki Murakami, who's a Japanese writer who writes kind of surreal novels, I think is awesome. Straight Man, Richard Russo is somebody I don't know that I really liked. Anything Gabriel Garcia Marquez. Like there's this one of Chronicle of a Death Foretold that I think is just an amazing structuring narrative to it, where you kind of know the conclusion, but you don't know all of the context and pieces that come into it. So yeah, there's a lot. I mean, the list could go on. Ragtime is another one that I really like.
That's excellent.
Just kind of blending in some fiction with facts as well. It's kind of a piece that I like.
Yeah. Professionally, do you have any books that you recommend for law firm leaders? Anything that sticks out to your mind right now?
The one I would say is not even a book, so I'll save people some time and reading on that one. But Mark Rolig is an attorney who I've had the pleasure to speak with and connect with at various points. He wrote an article that is, so I became a GC, now what? I think it's, so I just became the GC, now what? And it has really just practical, insightful, almost checkpoints and ideas for how you go about structuring, your team or the way you're approached or that you're perceived. It's specifically about becoming a GC, but I found it much more the case to be for really any new position and how you tap into your creative energy and structuring yourself well for success and for your team's success that's there. So that's one that I really like, and I've read probably 5 to 6 times at different positions, but it definitely resonated.
That's excellent. Thank you. Craig, so last question. What are your superpowers?
Superpowers. So I tend to like people and like spending time both with people and getting to know people. And that's something that I think most people do, but I tend to probably do it a little bit more than most. So if you think about superpowers, for me, it's just being able to connect with people one-on-one in particular is one of the things that I've not really had a lot of difficulty doing with, people from lots of different backgrounds and cultures and all of that. And I like spending time with people, and I like listening, frankly, a lot more than I like talking. So that's something that I tend to be able to find areas of common interest or enthusiasm with many types of people.
Craig, it's been an honor and a pleasure. Thank you so much for your time today.
No, Chris, my pleasure. It's really great to speak with you, and I enjoy the podcast a ton, so happy to be able to contribute.
Thank you, everyone who listened to this episode of the Law Firm Leadership Podcast. If you haven't already, please take a moment and subscribe. Also, we would love your feedback. You can leave feedback in 3 easy ways. You can go to the blog post on our website. You can click Give Feedback link in the show notes on your device. And then thirdly, you can text the phrase LFL podcast to the number 44222. That's LFL PODCAST. And thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Law Firm Leadership Podcast. This podcast is for education purposes only. This content cannot be used for commercial use without written permission from the Lion Group. If you like this podcast, leave a review on iTunes.